Hello, and welcome to Criminal Justice Inspection Unpacked, the podcast of Criminal Justice Inspection Northern Ireland. I'm Melanie McVeigh, and today I'm joined by three guests to talk about the latest CJI inspection, which looked at what is going on a daily basis to effectively support and ensure the smooth running of our criminal courts across Northern Ireland. They are Glyn Capper, Director of the Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunals Service, Elaine Topping, who is the Acting Chief Operating Officer with the agency, and CJI Lead Inspector Muireann Bohill. Glyn has been with the Courts and Tribunals Service since 2021 and before that held a number of senior roles within the Department of Justice, where he spent time working on justice performance and in finance. Elaine joined the Courts and Tribunals Service about 11 years ago, starting off in corporate services and then spending time in tribunals and courts operations before taking up her current role. Muireann joined CJI in autumn 2020 and since then has both led on and supported a range of inspections, including those on criminal legal aid processing and effective penalty enforcement, and recent work on file quality, disclosure and case progression. You're all very welcome. So, on the face of it, criminal courts administration, I think we can agree that it doesn't sound like it's going to be the most gripping of topics, but I think this might be a classic case of not judging a book by the cover. Would that be right, folks? Oh, don't rush at once. No.
I would definitely agree.
Is that right, Elaine? Okay. What about you, Glyn?
Well, Melanie, I think, as you said, I've been with Courts and Tribunals from 2021 or so, and to be fair, whilst I knew some of what went on, didn't know a huge amount. But actually, as I have spent time in the agency, as I have seen more and more of what we do, as I have gone around and met staff across our various regions, I have been increasingly surprised at the breadth and depth and the quality of what goes on in the organisation. So whilst, as you say, on face value, mightn't sound the most exciting
it's not
thing,
the page turner.
There's a huge amount of really good and interesting stuff goes on within the world of courts and tribunals.
Okay, we'll look forward to exploring that in more detail with you. And perhaps, Muireann, you will come to you and you can kick us off and tell us why it's been important to carry out this inspection. What exactly is criminal court administration, and more importantly, why should we care about it?
Yes, thank you, Melanie. Just to actually following off what Glyn has said, this was the first time we'd focused in on criminal court administration, focusing in on youth courts, magistrates court and crown court. And it was just through doing this inspection we had an appreciation of, as Glyn said, the breadth of work involved in administration. So it involves case processing, it involves preparation of cases for court, the allocation of resources for court hearings and to support the judiciary, both before court, during court and after court. It involves the administration of all court business before the court, during the court and post-court, and that includes accurately recording all the results and then issuing all the correspondence subsequent to court, setting out the decisions that have been taken. In addition to that, further, Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service are responsible for facilitating all the court hearings and also for providing the equipment for hearings, both within the court buildings and in the remote evidence centres also. Why is it important? To give a wee bit of context, Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service issue over 1 million decisions issued in court every year.
That's quite a substantial volume.
Significant amount. So when you recognise the volume of the work being processed by staff and going through court, the importance of that then, getting it right, you get it right, defendants, victims and witnesses know the outcomes of case. And it enables the other criminal justice agencies to manage their resources appropriately. Get it wrong and the implications are quite far-reaching. Someone can be detained in custody for longer than they should be. There could perhaps be public safety concerns if, for example, a particular type of protection order isn't issued within time. It can delay the progression of cases and it can incur costs.
So actually a lot more to it than what the title of the inspection would actually lead you to believe. There's a lot more involved in it. So can you tell us a little bit about what exactly was it you were looking at as part of this inspection? What did you do?
What did we do? Well, first of all, we spoke to quite a lot of staff within Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service, and we spoke with management and people within the different specific roles. And we visited 8 court offices. And in doing the rounds of the court offices, we also visited a number of Crown Courts, Magistrates Courts, and the Substance Misuse Court. And we also linked in with key criminal justice partners, to name a few: the Department of Justice, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, the Public Prosecution Service, the Lady Chief Justice's Office, and the Youth Justice Agency, and the Northern Ireland Prison Service. We also spoke with those outside the criminal justice service, but in voluntary sector. For example, we spoke to the Victim Support Northern Ireland. We spoke to the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, amongst others. So as you can see, there were a lot of people. The impact of the work being done by Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunals Service is quite extensive and impacts all across the criminal justice system.
So you were going out and having conversations with an awful lot of individuals.
We were indeed.
Yeah.
What Muireann said there just highlights the sheer number of stakeholders that are involved in court administration, both, as you say, within the immediate criminal justice system, but also those organisations that touch it as well. So it's
well, this was the first time, as Muireann said, Glenn, that CJI have actually looked at this particular area of courts and tribunal service business. Is it an inspection that you were welcoming as the head of the organisation?
It is, Melanie. I suppose when you hear the criminal justice inspection are coming and doing it,
everybody cheers with glee.
Your most immediate thought isn't, I welcome this, but to be fair, genuinely, it has been a really useful inspection for the organisation, and we genuinely do welcome the recommendations that have been made. I suppose knowing the journey that we were already on as an organisation, so I've been in my current post about 2 years, Elaine round about the same time, and we both recognised that there were things we needed to do and the organisation needed to do to improve. So we were on a journey. I think the benefit to me of the inspection has been that it's confirmed the direction of travel that we were on. It's affirmed some of the actions that we have already taken and are taking, and also has flagged some other areas for us to think about. So from the point of view of being an inspection that has given us just that confirmation of our direction of travel, it's been a really valuable piece.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask Lynn actually what he hoped that I was going to find, and he sort of already touched on that for us. Elaine, what about for yourself? What was the key thing for you with this inspection?
Well, again, as Glenn said, realising the actions that we have in train, we're going to address some of the key issues here in and around recruitment, retention, training, all things that we knew needed to happen. And we can't use COVID as an excuse forever, nor would we intend to, but obviously we were coming out of that recovery period and we were starting to focus. I see, because the findings do reiterate where we kind of looked and knew what the priorities were, it's going to be a great benchmarking tool for us as well. And we very much see that as we develop our people strategy, our workforce strategy. This is very much the benchmark of where we need to improve from. And I think we really welcome it for that reason.
Mm-hmm. And on that point, I'll maybe turn back to Muireann, and maybe you can actually tell us a little bit about the inspection findings and what you discovered as a part of that.
Yes, well, Elaine touched on it there. A significant part of it was the inability to recruit staff for a number of reasons, particularly court clerks in a timely manner had put pressure on the Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service. But we did see evidence of Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service being proactive in trying to resolve that, not just in the short term, but with an eye to the future, to look at resourcing in the long term. But despite the staffing pressures, and the fact that they were impacting service delivery, the Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service had supported a throughput of cases of 115% in the Crown Court and 105% in the Magistrates Court. Now, compliance with serving of court orders was an area that we identified as requiring improvement, because whilst there were a significant amount issued without issue, there were 2,040 that were issued outside the 1 day time limit. And whilst that is a low number in comparison to the overall numbers of orders issued, it was the impossible implications and public safety concerns arising out of those. Similarly, the percentage of court orders that required amended or deleted from 2020 to 23 had gradually been increasing. And this was due to internal staff error, again, with resourcing being one of the contributing factors. We accept that. But again, whilst the number that were amended and deleted over that 3-year period were less than 1%, it was 0.5%. The number of them in total were 4,810 amendments and 4,563 deletions. So whilst a small percentage overall, again, it was an area that required improvement regarding performance management and quality assurance. One thing that was certainly identified during the inspection was the sterling work that Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service did during the pandemic, not only in relation to staff coming in and working when a lot of other businesses had ceased working or were on furlough, but they also provided IT and court facilities to enable the criminal justice process to continue.
Okay.
And the work that was done was quite significant and quite advanced, because they also set up arrangements to enable defence practitioners and other criminal justice bodies to communicate digitally, which reduced delay and helped conduct our court business continue on.
So there's an awful lot that's actually coming out of this at all. And there's a couple of points particularly that I'd like to pick up on with Glyn and Elaine, if you don't mind. So Glyn, I'll give you a wee bit of forewarning. I'm going to come to you and talk to you about the court orders, but if you don't mind, I'll give you a wee bit of thinking time. And Elaine, I'm going to just chat to you about, Muireann talked about staffing issues there. She talked very positively about the volume of cases going through the courts, but also the pressures that you're under. What's the on-the-ground impact of that for your staff?
For staff, I think it's, to be honest, this report is very positive in terms of, and very positive in terms of staff contribution. And I think we've tried to give out, Glyn, myself, managers right the way through the organisation have tried to be really positive in terms of, we recognise your contribution. But I'm not sure that everybody else recognised their contribution. So to see it in black and white and for people to actually see that we played a pivotal role and that positive role, I think is really welcoming. So that would be my first sort of response. In terms of actual on the ground, there is no doubt, and I'm sure during the workshops the same thing came out, there is a slight fatigue there. It is a demanding job, especially the court clerk role, the manager's role, all of that supporting role. You are in the office every day. It is quick turnaround time.
And it needs a very unique skill set as well to service courts appropriately and effectively.
And for some time we've talked about what pathways for recruitment we could work with our next HR colleagues on. So I think a real positive for staff is seeing the first of those coming to light was the court clerk job-specific recruitment, which happened or was advertised over the summer period. And I think for staff, there's now a sense of, we're not talking about seeing people coming in to support us and refresh what we're doing, but we're actually seeing that there is a recruitment pathway, and that would be a supply path for us going forward. So it's not just a here and now, it's a constant. So whenever we need people, we will be able to call off that particular exercise.
And what's the response? Do you mind me asking if you can tell me what the response has been to that so far?
Can't tell you the numbers at this point in time simply because it wouldn't be appropriate, but I can tell you it was a very high response rate and a really positive one, both from internal and external applicants. So I think that's really positive.
Really, really pleased with the response rate. It was an excellent response rate.
And again, part of that goes down to our own staff as well, who did video clips to let people know what the job was, because really that's what we find through a general service competition. People didn't realise what we just talked about it. People don't know what we do.
Yes. What is courts administration? Exactly. What does the role of a court clerk? Yeah. What is it you're actually being expected to do on a day-to-day basis if you're the person in that?
That's it. And we really did do a lot of work to make sure people knew that in advance. And let's hope that that all bears. Obviously, this is the first time we're doing it. They may be learning that we have to apply whenever we do it in a future year. But actually, the response was really, really positive. But for staff on the ground, then there's a knowing that we are actually doing something, because it took quite some time to do for a number of reasons. And I can get why people may have thought, you're not doing anything.
Yeah, and there is also the other aspect of the job as well. It's important to ensure that there's appropriate training for staff and they're given the skills from a point of induction right through their career to be able to do the job as effectively and efficiently as possible. Is that not?
Definitely. And I would say that the report quite rightly does point that maybe wasn't as good as it could have been.
I was just going to comment to you about that.
I'm definitely going to acknowledge that. And part of that, I will say, was a resourcing problem as well. You get into that chicken and egg. If you don't have the people to do it and then you're bringing new people in, where does it all stop and start? Where we think we are now is in a better place to provide that, in that we know that people will be starting, hopefully, in the coming months. And we have a dedicated programme set aside for that. So it isn't just our standard induction, which we have already established, but we will be doing additional training
More
for people.
robust skilling up of staff.
And people coming through right the way through. And I think, again,
will that be across, not just in Belfast, that will be right across Northern Ireland?
That will be across. We will go out to regions. It'll be a blended approach to training. So I think some of the feedback in the report might have talked about no training. I think some people are still stuck on a classroom training mode, where we have had a few training courses put on Links, which is the civil service online training platform, such as resulting of bail, victims of witness training. It's important that we get that message that it's going to be a blend. It will be some online, it'll be some classroom, it'll be some mentoring, it'll be some job shadowing, but we're putting together a programme. And it won't matter if you have been in the agency before, either temporary or at a different grade, everyone will go through and get a consistent training. And then we hope to roll that out further. This is just where we start. These things, it's never an end. It's where we start, and then to refresh that with more. And a commitment to that is we have a course set up in November, beginning of November, to do some train the trainer with some of our own staff. And I think that's really important. Even you're mentoring somebody, that you learn how to give a message and make sure that that message is there.
Do you think that's going to support and improve morale within the organisation as well? Because again, there was a wee bit of, there's a few things within the inspection report showed that, maybe staff were starting to feel the pressure, and, just the morale within the organisation had taken a bit of it.
I think a combination of staff seeing a supply of staff and knowing that those vacancies will no longer be sitting. With a lot of temporary solutions in place, they're not good long term for people. People need stability to know who will be in a post and who will be, and our partner organisations need to know who will be in posts. But we also had the AO recruitment, which is
that's
admin officer, civil service lingo, admin officer campaign at the moment, and we've managed to secure a particular section in that recruitment, again saying what we do as an organisation, and for people to actually opt in to say whether they'd like to work with us or not. Now, that's a really positive step as well. So I would like to think that those are indicators to people that there are good things coming, and there is a lot of goodwill out there. Glenn has heard a lot of it in his recent visits, and we would hope that that's enough. We're getting those messages to people to let them know that this is what we're doing, and I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to, I did say I would give you a wee bit of thinking time there, Glenn, but I am going to come to you. And Muireann spoke about court orders and the importance of it. There's substantial volumes going through, over 4,800 in a sort of 3-year period. But of that, over the 4,800 were requiring amendment, with 4,500 being deleted, and largely due to staff error. How concerning is that for you as the head of the organisation, and what is it that can be done to change that?
Yeah, so that's a really important area, and I'll come back to that. Can I just say a few bits and pieces about the previous conversation, because there's lots of stuff in there too. I just want to pick up on. Really importantly, I think it's really beneficial, and thank you to Muireann and the team for picking up in the report just that piece about the work that staff did during COVID. I'm really proud to lead such a brilliant group of staff across this organisation. I think just that recognition that our staff come into challenging circumstances, particularly in those early days of COVID, and were in the office, in the courtroom, frontline, delivering a really important service to keep effectively the administration of justice moving, is really vital. So thank you for acknowledging that, and that'll be appreciated by staff. On the recruitment piece, Elaine's touched on lots of the detail. Again, I think it's important we don't underestimate the significance of securing that first ever court clerk bespoke recruitment campaign, because that's the first time we've done that as an organisation. And it's been, as we've said, really positive feedback. And it's one of those things in response to the report that we're not just saying we're going to do, that's actually happened. So we're banging in the middle of interviews at the minute. And equally, the administrative officer piece, we were able to tick and opt into courts as a first too. So I think there's really, really positive things there. You asked Melanie about, will that improve morale? I've been out and about around the organisation recently. And again, that, as I touched on at the start, re-emphasises to me the brilliant jobs that our folk do on a day and daily basis. But the themes that I'm picking up as I'm going around are about just that staff recruitment piece, and having more resources. So I do genuinely think and hope that those competitions will improve the views of staff. On the piece about the errors, as I said, Melanie, really important that we get that right. I suppose one error is too much. To put it in context, I think the report identifies the error rate was round about 0.5%.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, it's a low rate, but equally we know that we need to.
It all comes down to it's that impact because of what those errors can actually lead to, Glenn.
So what are we doing about that? Again, Elaine and her team have already taken action on that. We have looked at the reporting that staff across the agency and court operations monitor on a monthly basis, on a more regular basis. And we've looked at the level of checking that goes on. So we've already put in place procedures that we know and expect will help to, A, just embed that culture of checking and monitoring, and B, should reduce that error rate even further.
Because, Marina, if I'm right, there was a number of recommendations within the report to sort of try and assist with that process, and the turnaround timeframes that were given were quite swift. Because is that about the importance that you wanted courts and tribunals to be focusing on that right from the get-go?
That's correct, and I think it has been picked up and discussed. We do, we have said a number of times now, the percentages are low in the grand scheme of the volume of output and work of the Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service, but it's the impact of the numbers and the impact of what that means to members of the public.
It's that public confidence piece.
That is exactly it, and it's wonderful to hear all the positive work that's already commenced. We actually had seen some of that work already commencing when we were carrying out this inspection. We had already seen, for example, the beginnings of the putting together of best practice guidance for court clerks, which is, as you said, a very specific role. So there was a lot of staff engagement already happening around that recognition of the value of the expertise in that specific area to help and guide and help staff coming in. So that also a way of capturing that knowledge was not lost. As a bit around the succession planning. So yes, it was about recognising the impact so that the public can have confidence in the Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service, because as we have said, their impact is all across the criminal justice system and very far reaching.
And as well as those checks that we've talked about, back to the discussion in relation to resourcing and more staff coming in and training, that will impact.
Do you think that's going to help with that process?
Just give that more capacity and ability to improve the monitoring and checking.
I mean, the reality of life during the pandemic and post-pandemic, and because of the resourcing issues, where that some of our managers were actually in court undertaking the court clerk role because they had to, because the frontline service required them to do that. So there's no doubt that it had an impact on the resulting and the management check process. But managers have really picked up on that, and I really welcome it been acknowledged in the report that some work had already started as well. And we actually monitor to look at potential trends as well, which is something really important to the business managers to discuss that on their monthly meetings. But the work with our colleagues in prison service, there is no doubt that when you become familiar with people and fellow organisations, that sometimes those service level agreement issues aren't as prevalent, and then you forget that we have to meet and we must talk about these. You assume they're working or it's all informal. So we've very much set up that formal process again with our colleagues in prison service. And I think that was really important, because it's just a reminder that of their importance, and for managers as well.
I was going to pick up on that because, going back to that point about identifying the errors, because it's one thing to have them, but it's even more important to get them identified and then get them resolved. So there was more than 50%, I think, of those errors were being brought to your attention from external sources. So obviously, what are your thoughts around that? And is that something that you're going to be working through to hopefully address?
But that would be predominantly our colleagues in prison service who we would be working with alongside sometimes police service, but it's mostly the prison service. And it is something, now I probably should point out that it is a two-way process as well. So sometimes we are picking up other people's errors. In fact, we are, and obviously that isn't something that would be recorded because we're not recording that anywhere. So it's not a perfect system, but I would suggest the system is much more robust now than it would have been 12 months ago. And part of that is down to resourcing. The other part is down to the guidance, as we've recognised, and then the training element coming in. We're doing a training session, for example, next month, and it's about actually German codes, but it's showing you that focus on, whilst you've had one aspect of it, there are other areas that we know are very important as well. So that has come through the training forum, and that's something that we'll be doing. And again, it will be around the country, so it won't just be Belfast. And we'll be taking that and going out and explaining to people, one, the importance of it as well, the very aspect that you've touched on, why it's important that we get these things right, and then making sure and evaluating the training and making sure that we do see positive impacts.
Back in 2022, we launched the first NICTS People Strategy, which is 5 pillars. First pillar is about skills. So over the next few months, a huge focus from Elaine and me is on training and developing the skills of our teams across the region. And that's both at induction, but just that ongoing piece as well.
Because it's about maintaining that effective service from the start, from when somebody joins the organisation and moves right through.
And staff deserve that level of training and support and to understand where those resources are. And I suppose maybe whilst we thought everybody would have gone to the resource, which is known as the knowledge bank, it's encouraging people to do that. And it's that piece of just because something's there doesn't mean to say that people will use it. So it's reminding people on a continuous basis, and we're better to do that whenever you're training somebody, to say, look, here's where you get it, because they won't just go for that, they'll go for other things. So there is a lot of work to be done. There's work which has been done that I don't think people necessarily have yet realised it's been done. So it's highlighting that. So it's a combination of all of that, I think.
And I think it's also not just a case of Elaine and I and sort of management thinking about and deciding what's appropriate training.
It's about that two-way street.
Important to hear from staff across the organisation. What
are you quite open to that engagement with staff and hearing from them?
Past year, one of the things we've introduced as part of induction is a welcome to an NICTS session, where I meet with a group of a dozen or so staff who have just joined, and we try and capture all staff as part of this process. So either myself or some of the SMT meet with folk who have just joined, just to tell them a bit more about the organisation, to say a bit more about what we do, to introduce different areas. And one of the really important bits of that is to hear from folk what their experience of joining the organisation has been, to hear about their experience of training, both centrally and locally. And that's been really useful, just to hear from folk about what they think has gone well, but probably as importantly, what hasn't gone as well and what we can do to improve. So really open to hearing that, both as part of those sessions on the ground through Elaine's team, and as we go out and engage with folk, there's some really useful stuff coming up.
Because that feedback and that engagement and that listening to various staff outside, those that engage with courts and those that work within it, Marilyn, that's sort of very central to the work of the inspection as well, isn't it? They're getting that sort of first-hand information.
Oh, very much so. Very much so. At the end of the day, the staff in Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service are best placed to give people the advice and the help that they need, because they know the processes, they know the systems better than anyone else. And because their work touches in so many aspects, those relationships need to be positive, they need to be progressive. And what we certainly find with staff, very dedicated staff working within Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service, no doubt about that. But very keen to develop good working relationships, not just internally but externally as well, and establishing point of contacts that they can utilise and take advantage of within the different criminal justice organisations. So staff themselves did recognise the importance of maintaining good working relationships internally and externally, and they did use it to the best of their ability and to the best of their advantage.
And I'm going to pick up on that working relationships, because there's one thing, there's the working relationships within the courts, but the other key element of it is the working relationships with the members of the judiciary, the ones that are actually in charge of the courts across Northern Ireland. What was it that you were hearing from those individuals about the support that they were getting from the Courts and Tribunals Service?
Well, first and foremost, the judiciary we spoke to, they spoke very positively and very highly of the experienced and diligent staff who supported them in their role. Obviously, we heard many times they couldn't do what they do without them. But they did raise the lack of experience and training of incumbent staff as an issue. Again, we've touched on the fact that because of the resourcing issue, the Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service were quite heavily reliant on temporary promoted staff, but also agency staff. And because of the climate that they were in at that time, the opportunities for training, it was a lot of frontline service, and Elaine touched on it, management being brought into court. So it was very much firefighting at that point. So the judges' opinions were very reflective of the climate in which they were working. But they did say there was a 70%, roughly 70% in the judicial survey in 2022 assessed the quality of administrative support as excellent or good. So we're in around 70%, which was an increase from the previous survey in 2014. But the survey also did find that the number that found the quality to be poor had also increased to 17%, which was a 12 percentage point increase from 2014. But again, this was, we have to look at things in context, and it was reflective of the time. But again, what we're hearing today very clearly, and what we heard during the course of the inspection, is recognition that there are areas requiring improvement, and looking for ways to make those improvements, and looking at ways to improve processes. And whenever we go in and do reports and identify areas for improvement, the hope is that they will be taken on board and that we can work collaboratively to try and improve things and to try and make recommendations that are productive and practical, but also achievable.
Are you encouraged by the way that courts and tribunals have responded to the recommendations that have been made?
Very much so. We've heard many examples today of ongoing work. And as I referred to earlier, we already saw examples of the work commencing whilst we were carrying out the inspection. The Vision 2030 that Court Service are working to, the Vision 2030 strategy.
What is that exactly?
Vision 2030 is our modernisation portfolio. So it's essentially setting out our aims and objectives to improve courts and tribunal services. Two main streams of that. One is our estate strategy. So we published just before Christmas, but it's now September. So that's last year we published our first estate strategy, which set out the aims and objectives through which we want to develop our estate. The other piece is on our service modernisation strand. So I suppose the most exciting piece of that currently is that we have a project which we've called Themis. And Themis is going to bring about wholesale digital transformation of courts and tribunal service, which is a grand statement. But having seen the work...
Sounds ambitious, Glenn.
It is ambitious. And I think it's right that we're ambitious, because we know as an organisation there's lots more that we can do better. And the folk who run this project would absolutely be saying to me, don't say that it's a replacement for our current case management system. It's much more than that. It's looking at how we do our business and transforming that and engaging a digital system around that. So essentially that's going to change how we interact with most of our stakeholders, with the legal profession. It will move us, hopefully. One of the other things I've noticed as I've gone around our regional offices is the huge number of files and paper about the organisation. So this will move us onto much more of a digital platform and essentially transform the services that we provide. We've just appointed a handful of weeks ago our partner organisation to go with us on that journey. And as we were chatting about at the start, that work is kicked off. There's a team now in place. So over the next 4 or 5 years, incrementally, we should see our services transforming.
Because courts was actually, we were reflecting on it earlier on in the conversation, courts were quite agile and quite responsive during the pandemic, and were, able to keep the sort of the wheels of justice going because of that change to from an in-person setting to hybrid arrangements. There was even digital submission of paperwork. But then, if I picked it up correctly, there was a little step back from that. It was nearly a wee shift back to the hard copy paper.
To me, somebody sending a an email is not technology and not transformation. It's just shifting the burden of printing from one organization to the other. What we're talking about in terms of transformation is that things will come in an electronic format. So it'll be a case file coming in, it'll be an application coming in. It's directly onto a system. That's the transformation piece. We touched on the resources earlier. We simply weren't ever resourced to do all of the printing for every other organisation, which is not just criminal justice organisations, but the likes of the legal profession and so on. So we were never resourced to do that in the first place. And certainly we've talked about our resourcing challenges. So it wasn't really a step back. It was equalising where we were, because equally that isn't transformation. Transformation is the piece which we're talking about, where it's a digital case file, where it is,
and it stays digital from the point of submission right through.
Because we don't create things come to us, but they will be coming to us in a digital format. And I would have to say it is ambitious, but many of our justice partners are on the journey. So we see the Public Prosecution Service in court, they have their tablets with them, they're receiving digital. Police service also are working in a digital strategy. So it's ambitious, but many of our partners are moving in the same direction. So it'd be remiss of us if we weren't moving in the same direction as them.
I think your points, I totally agree with what Elaine said. I think your point's well made, Melanie, about not losing some of the digital shift that we saw during COVID. So just to throw in a few stats, we talk about SiteLink, which is the video platform that we use for remote hearings.
That's the remote connectivity between either a prison location or potentially
a legal firm.
Legal firm.
Into the court, yeah.
We measure what we call SiteLink connections. So I think the month before COVID, and these aren't exact stats, but roughly the month before COVID, we had a couple of hundred SiteLink connections. A couple of months into COVID at its peak, we were averaging about 80,000 SiteLink connections a month. So you can see the quantum leap there. And we're now at a sort of post-COVID new normal, maybe 30, 40,000 a month. So I think even though it's dropped from the peak of COVID, I think you can see the huge shift there from 100 or so pre-COVID to a new normal of 30 or 40,000. So yeah, we need to maintain that digital journey.
Just one of the, obviously, key to that will be bringing along your judicial partners as well. Maybe, Glenn, can I just touch on, what about the relationship between courts, judges, staff? How important is it to have a really effective working relationship, respecting everybody's independence as well?
Respecting everybody's position, fundamentally important. And I think that's something we do really well as an organisation. We've got three aims as an organisation: working in partnership, supporting the judiciary and improving courts and tribunals. So that supporting the judiciary is front and centre of what we do. At a local level, really good examples of staff working really effectively with judges to provide that support across the regions. I meet once a month with the Lady Chief Justice just to have a conversation about the issues that the Lady Chief Justice wants to raise, the things that I want to share with her. So there's a really good relationship there. And I think touching on the digital piece, you're right, as we go on this digital journey, going to be really important. The judiciary is on that journey with us. I think we've got really good structures in place to make that happen. So we talked about Themis and our digital Vision 2030 strand. We've judicial colleagues with us on those programme boards and so on, so they can provide input and can hear what's happening. But you're right, bringing the judiciary with us on that journey is going to be really important.
And what about, I know they, obviously courts and tribunal staff and the organisation doesn't have any ability to control or influence how a judge decides to take forward a case or what they feel is in the best interests of justice. But in terms of the operational, the day-to-day business, what are you guys doing to keep things moving? Because we're always hearing about delay, the impact of delay, about the figures within Northern Ireland as well. You guys are in the coalface there around the administrative support.
I think there's two levels. At an operational level, our staff play a really important role in making sure that the speed of the justice system is as effective as it can be. We know there's loads more, both as an organisation and as a justice system, what we need to do. I think people talk about delays in courts. What we actually mean is delays in the end-to-end criminal justice system, from the point of arrest or charge through to disposal at court. So it's that end-to-end piece. lots of examples of what we're doing administratively. So over the past few years, we've introduced, for example, case progression officers in the Crown Court, which is a dedicated role. I think our court touches on it, Muireann. Dedicated role where a member of court staff interfaces with all the stakeholders that are involved in a case, including the judge, just to, as the title suggests, progress that case even more quickly. So loads of examples there at a day-to-day level. More strategically, I sit in the Criminal Justice Board, and Courts and Tribunal Service is taking forward a couple of pieces of work as part of a wider Criminal Justice Board Speeding Up Justice initiative. So we're looking at the remit, for example, of the Magistrates Court, and we're also looking at options to take some cases where it's appropriate out of court so that it's dealt with in a different way. Anything you want to add, Lillian?
No, I think one of the other things that we're doing, and it's very much, you talked about bringing people with us, and how to speed things up is to make sure that when people have an experience of something, that it's a good experience. So we've talked about the remote access to courts, that has been a positive for all involved, including the judiciary, as you mentioned. So I think then you've got the buy-in, then you've got people who want to keep going, because making sure, we always say our job is very much to provide all of that platform for everybody to make sure it's right, and certainly having the right number of people to administer and clerk courts will be another very important aspect of that. But to make sure that when it happens right. And I think we have good examples of that. The stats from the remote hearings show that. But also we have in the High Court the e-bundle pilot, and that has been quite effective. So that shows that the judiciary, as well as the profession, have bought in.
Electronic submission of papers.
Yes. So, but they come in as a bundle and they're working on them throughout the process on the bundle, albeit in a limited process. And it's very much a forerunner to Themis, but it shows that we are working together and there's a collective appreciation that is the way to go, and that is the way to speed up cases as they go through the court.
Well, just maybe to bring this conversation to a natural close, Muireann, what is it that you want to be seeing happening in the coming years, and how are you going to be tracking that to make sure that what is committed to is actually delivered?
Well, firstly, the Vision 2030 it is ambitious, but it's an opportunity for Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service to transform how they do things, but doing so in conjunction with the work that was identified as needing done in this report, and using the findings to best inform how you move forward with Vision 2030. The core of which would be obviously resourcing, but upskilling staff and engaging them so that they go with you on that journey. There's no doubt, if it's Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service and many other services, the staff are the most valuable asset. And going forward, the best way for us to monitor and track improvements is just to keep abreast of developments, improvements, which we're already doing. As we were discussing earlier, we can see work already ongoing in relation to various communication forums with staff, but also in due course, we may identify Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service as an organisation we would like to go back and do a follow-up review with, just to see how they're progressing against their recommendations, and see if there are any other areas we can add value or help with any improvements or any work in that area at all.
Glenn, I'll come to you just finally. Do you think the recommendations that are made in this report, are they going to help courts and tribunals to deliver better services in the future?
Absolutely.
The answer to that has to be yes. Obviously, Muireann's listening, but
I went even further and said absolutely. So no, absolutely, they will be. You asked me at the start, Melanie, that I welcome the criminal justice inspection. We really do. I think the recommendations have been really useful, as I said at the start, just to confirm and affirm hopefully a direction of travel, but also to add value and give us other areas to look at. Muireann said there might be a follow-up inspection, and I think genuinely we would welcome that too. And I hope if Muireann and the team are back in 12 or 18 months, that they'll see the progress that we've already started, but also some of the things we've talked about actually embedded. So we look forward to colleagues coming back just to see how things have gone.
it's very encouraging to hear, but time again has beaten us. And who knew when we started out that we would still be able to talk about courts and tribunals and criminal court administration for such a length of time. Thank you to my guests, Glyn, Elaine and Murren, for joining me for this episode of Criminal Justice Inspection Unpacked. I hope you've enjoyed listening to our conversation and you know a little bit more about the topic than when you started. If this has whetted your appetite or you want to hear more about the topics and issues impacting on the criminal justice system in Northern Ireland, you can listen to episodes of our podcast anytime on Podbean or your preferred podcast platform. Until the next time, goodbye for now, and I look forward to joining you again soon.